who they just can't stand that we're taking their hands out of the cookie jar.
That's Doug Ford rallying his base at this weekend's Ford Fest. He slammed downtown insiders and the media at the annual barbecue. Why? Well, Ford used to be Mr. Popular, except these days, maybe not so popular. His poll numbers are down, way down. So has Ford's populist for the people rhetoric backfired? Just last summer, Ford won a majority government. But now Ontario voters seem to be falling out of love. If an election were held today, polls suggest the Tories would get about 35%, not enough to win another majority. And Ford himself, well, he's polling at around 29%, making him one of the least popular premiers in the country. All of this might explain what happened this past Monday at the Toronto Raptors Championship Parade.
The Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford.
Yep, Ontario's Premier walked on stage only to be greeted by a chorus of boos from thousands of basketball fans. You know who received a much warmer welcome?
Please welcome the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau!
Not a great moment for Doug Ford. And then, just days after that big boo, a major reset. Ford demoted some of his top cabinet ministers. He even switched out his finance minister, Vic Fedeli, after his first budget, and that almost never happens. Then, on Friday, his chief of staff had to resign after some controversial patronage appointments. That was just this week. The week before, other big news. Ford announced the legislature will be rising for its summer hiatus, but this time, they're not coming back until late October. And guess what happens in October? Yep, a federal election. So what's going on here? Well, here's a hint. Ford says he's not planning to campaign for the federal Conservative leader, Andrew Scheer. So what happened? Back in May, Alberta's Jason Kenney was happy for Ford's help in his campaign, but now it's pretty obvious Scheer doesn't want Ford's help. Kenney, well, for him, the door is wide open. Kenney plans to campaign for Scheer in Ford's backyard. It's all a pretty big change from last fall when Ford was part of this Conservative family photo that Maclean's labelled the Resistance. Now that Ford's numbers have slumped, Scheer's opponents are gleefully using those photos to whack the federal Tories. Check out this ad, which ran during that game where the Raptors won the series.
Scheer will never stand up to Ford. Get the picture. Andrew Scheer. His weakness will cost you.
And there were more Ford Scheer photos in this ad, another one paid for by the anti-Conservative coalition Engage Canada.
Well, this federal Conservative, Andrew Scheer, he's like a lapdog for Ford.
That weak?
I mean, he'll never stand up to Ford.
Yikes. So how did Mr. Popular become Mr. Unpopular?
My friend, this is your victory. Tonight is your night.
The Premier of Ontario.
From booze to booze. How'd we get here? Doug Ford's first year was ripped right out of the populist playbook. First move, trash the elites.
People that look down on the common folk, the people that think they're better, they're smarter, you know, when they drink their little bottle or glass of champagne with their pinky up in the air. That's what an elite is.
He's a wealthy guy from a politically connected family, but he campaigned as just a regular guy for the people. So what did he do for the people? Well, he set out to cut the fat in government.
For what's best for our lives, for the people.
Ontario's budget deficit is now more than $13 billion. Ford promised he'd cut it without cutting jobs.
I want to assure our public sector workers, to our nurses, to our teachers, and to our doctors, that no one, and I repeat, no one, will lose their job.
Then a party for the people, booze and more of it. From bucket beer to beer in corner stores, that went over pretty well too.
We promised to bring a bucket of beer to Ontario.
But then things got a lot more complicated.
No profit, no fee, I'll do healthcare based on need.
The cuts began, and so did the protests. As the plan to end the gravy train started cutting gravy people cared about: education, public health, the environment, autism, and other social programs, all subject to funding cuts. Even the people's kids got angry. And in the end, public sector workers did lose their jobs. And the people, well, they pushed back hard. And now Doug Ford is into damage control. Some of those cuts are on hold. Joining me to talk about all of this is Mark Towle. He used to be Rob Ford's chief of staff. Now he's editor-in-chief at Sun News. So, Mark, it's pretty incredible. Ford's numbers seem to have slumped so much that he's not welcome on the federal campaign this fall with Andrew Scheer in his own province. Isn't that pretty incredible?
I don't know if it is, to be honest. Federal politics and provincial politics, the two very different rubrics there. And when premiers, whether they're Liberal or Conservative, campaign, as Premier Wynne did in one election on behalf of Justin Trudeau and then was not welcome at another one, it all depends on popularity, quite frankly. It's which way the wind is blowing.
Jason Kenney, the Alberta Premier, is coming to Ontario to campaign. He seems welcome. It doesn't seem that Doug Ford is welcome.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have any first-hand knowledge of that.
He says he's not going to campaign. Kenney says he's going to campaign in Ontario, in Doug Ford's province.
But he would be criticized either way. You know, like the Conservatives mercilessly criticized Premier Wynne when she did campaign on behalf of the federal government, and the Prime Minister when he came in.
But maybe that's a sign of lack of popularity or lack of
100%.
Influence.
No, it's 100%.
So he's lost influence then.
He's not necessarily the guy that they want to muddy up Andrew Scheer's message, whatever that is, with whatever Doug Ford's message. And let's face it.
So what is the difference then? What influence are they afraid that he will have on that campaign?
I'm not sure it's necessarily a negative thing, but when you're running a campaign, you want to have one clear, crystal, easy to understand, easy to pass from word, mouth to mouth message. And the Doug Ford government right now doesn't have that for itself. So bringing that into a federal, election campaign, I don't see the upside to that.
It's pretty incredible, though. We talk a lot about the 905 around Ontario. There's a lot of seats, and if Andrew Scheer is going to win the next election, he's got to win a bunch of seats in that area. So does Justin Trudeau, and he must love Doug Ford right now. We've actually seen his numbers go up in that part of the country. It's quite something.
The fall in popularity in the Doug Ford government right now, from the time it was elected a year ago to now, is pretty phenomenal. It
was very interesting at the news conference where he announced the big cabinet shuffle this week. He basically characterized the media as the enemy, that was a big part of his numbers going down. I mean, we've seen that before. You're now the head of a newspaper, of a chain. Does that concern you?
Well, now I are one. And in politics, you always need an enemy, because you need to focus people's attention and get their ire up so that you can go. If Doug Ford can focus all of his attention, all the public attention, because he still has a lot of support, on one common enemy that's easy to hate. But hello, that's us.
Yeah. But that
works for him.
Is that a good thing? This whole enemy of the people. I mean, we've seen there are populists. It's a lot of populists in control of governments all around the world these days, and for some of them, there's not a lot of freedom of the press. I'm not saying that he's gone there.
Well,
but
I think there's a lot of freedom of the press. I mean, we're here right now talking about this, and
But does that concern you, that he is portraying the media as an enemy? I mean, we've seen where this goes, and we've seen where populism can go. Not that he's gone there, but there's been a lot of efforts on his part to shut down critics within the media. People kicked off kicked off the bus, not on the bus, having his own reporters. Does as a journalist, as somebody who believes in free press, is that a concern?
I think it's something that we have to figure out, because on the initial instance, he's absolutely right. I mean, the people who write for newspapers, myself included, the people who run newspapers, the people who run TV stations and TV networks and TV news operations, are part of that group of people who've been very successful in the world as we know it. They're the establishment. And we have time to think about the theoretical impact of, some gas that we can't even see or smell, and how that might ruin the world 50 years from now, 100 years from now. The average person doesn't have time in their day to do that. They have to feed the kids in the morning, they have to get them dressed, get them off to school, get to work too hard, no time for lunch, get home, through traffic, get the kids, feed them.
And he campaigned on that, right?
That's
he
right.
said, I'm with you, I'm with the little people, and we need to get things done. They're not listening to you, but...
So when journalists and editors and TV anchors come out and say, not so much TV anchors, they're pretty objective, but opinion leaders on television and in the media come out and say, the people are stupid, because that's essentially what a lot of us have been saying.
Or are they saying that you said there would be no jobs lost, but there are jobs lost? Like even you were acknowledging that there's been errors made in some of the decisions.
Yeah, but so much of the editorial tone in the media, both in this country and the US, is about the people voted against their own interest. Well, no, they didn't. The people knew exactly who they were voting for when they voted for them, and they voted that way for a reason.
I guess it's just this whole idea that we're heading into a federal election now, and it just feels like everybody is yelling at each other all the time, and there's the evil elites over here, and there's the evil populists over here, and I just, is it being fanned too much?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, and that's, when I go back to my time in the campaign with Rob Ford for Mayor of Toronto and in the Mayor's office, we had a very deliberate strategy to basically turn the Toronto Star into our enemy. They were the single...
Well, they were accusing him of all kinds of things, most of which turned out to be true.
Some of it turned out to be true. A lot of it that we've forgotten because it wasn't true, didn't turn out to be true. It started with an article saying he'd beat up on a high school kid on a football field, and that was absolutely false. But it worked for us. And frankly, it worked for the Star, because the editor of the Star and I used to have regular conversations.
This is what's happening now?
To some extent, but I also think that got out of control because the unexpected ramifications of that, the way it drove other news outlets to sort of report on the media, there were a lot of unintended concomitant consequences that are probably not good for journalism and not good for democracy.
So is Canada ready for a populist premier?
Yeah, again, populist I think is not the right word, but I don't know a better word. So I think we are. I think this is exactly the person that we wanted. The question is, did we get what he promised?
Just find it so remarkable. It wasn't that long ago there was the cover of Maclean's, The Resistance. It was all the conservative leaders. Now there's more conservative premiers. And he was very much front and center. Now it seems nobody wants to have their picture taken with him.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd read that much into it, because if the polls turned around tomorrow, then Andrew Scheer would be knocking on his door to have a selfie. That's just the nature of politics.
Thank you so much for talking to me. It's been quite an interesting period.
My pleasure, anytime.
You're a journalist now. It's very different.
I have to behave like one. I don't know if I qualify yet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.